"Stop calling me," Rudo said, her voice cracking at the edges. "I mean it this time." The phone trembled in her hand. Outside the window, Seoul stretched endlessly glittering, indifferent, enormous. Director Choi's voice came through the speaker, like something mechanical, something that had never once learned what feelings were for. "You have a contract. You have obligations. You have a comeback stage in 6 weeks, and if you don't walk back through that door tonight, I will make sure every door in this industry closes behind you permanently." She stared at her reflection in the darkened glass. Full makeup, perfect hair, a face that millions of strangers claim to love. She didn't recognize any of it. "Then let them close," she whispered, and ended the call. What happened next changed everything. She opened her contact list, scrolled past hundreds of names, managers, stylists, executives, people who needed something from her, and stopped on the one name that simply said, Bomi. She typed 3 words: "I need to disappear." She didn't know yet that disappearing would be the most honest thing she'd ever done. She didn't know about the broken scooter, the tekobaki, or the man who would call her his ramen sister before learning her real name. She didn't know that the life she was walking into, small, ordinary, full of coin counting and night shifts, would crack her open in ways that 5 years of fame never could. And she didn't know that falling in love with Dawn would cost her everything, or maybe save her. If this story already has you feeling something, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Welcome to AfroK-Tales by Solomon, where love crosses every border, breaks every expectation, and finds you in the most unexpected places. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now and join a community that believes the most extraordinary stories happen to the most ordinary people. Drop a comment below. Tell me, would you have made the same call Rudo just made? Let's get into it. Bomi showed up 40 minutes later with a duffel bag, a black wig, and the expression of someone who had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times in the elevator on the way up. "You're serious," Bomi said. It wasn't a question. "I've never been more serious about anything." "Rudo." Bomi set the bag down slowly. "You are the most recognizable face in Korean pop right now. You cannot just vanish into a neighborhood and expect nobody to notice. Then help me make sure nobody does." Bomi looked at her for a long moment, at the makeup, at the exhaustion hiding underneath it, at the way Rudo's hands hadn't stopped shaking since she answered the door. And something in Bomi's expression shifted. The argument she'd prepared dissolved. "Okay," Bomi said quietly. "Okay, but listen carefully. No flexing. No credit cards with your name. No 5-star anything. You live like a real person with real problems, or this falls apart in 48 hours. I know. And the moment it gets dangerous, the moment anyone gets close to recognizing you, you call me and we pull you out. I know, Bomi." "And Rudo?" Bomi stepped closer, her voice dropping. "Whatever you find out there, whatever you're hoping to feel, just be careful with it. Real people's hearts aren't props. If someone falls for you out there, they're falling for the version of you that you showed them. That matters." Rudo nodded slowly, but she wasn't thinking about falling. Not yet. Mapo gu at 6 in the morning smelled like sesame oil and cold air and something faintly sweet from the bakery 3 buildings down. Rudo stood on the narrow street with her single duffel bag, her black wig slightly uneven, wearing jeans that Bomi had deliberately frayed at the knees. She looked for the first time in 5 years, like nobody in particular. It felt terrifying. It felt extraordinary. The rooftop apartment above the laundry shop was small enough that she could touch both walls if she stretched her arms wide. The ondol floor creaked. Far below, a street market stirred slowly awake. She sat on the floor because there was no furniture yet. She ate the convenience store kimbap she'd bought on the walkover. It was the best meal she'd had in months. Not because it was good, it wasn't particularly, but because nobody had arranged it, approved it, or calculated how it photographed. She pulled out her notebook and wrote one line at the top of the first empty page. Who am I when nobody is looking? She stared at it. Then she heard it floating up from the street below through someone's phone speaker, unmistakable. Her own voice. Her last single. The one that had debuted at #1 and stayed there for 11 weeks. She crossed to the window. He was closing up a tteokbokki stall, moving quickly in the early cold, stacking containers, wiping the cart with a worn cloth. Music played from a small phone propped against the edge. He listened for exactly 3 more seconds, then wrinkled his nose and switched it off. "Aigu," he muttered to himself, just loud enough to carry upward in the quiet street. Why does this song follow me everywhere? Every cafe? Every bus? He shook his head like he was physically removing it from his thoughts, and went back to stacking. Rudo stood at the window, completely invisible in the dark of her unlit room, and laughed, quietly, helplessly, into the back of her own hand. She didn't sleep that night. She sat at the window with her notebook and, for the first time in longer than she could remember, wrote something that wasn't for anyone else. His name, she learned 3 days later, was Dawn. She'd gotten completely lost trying to find the market Bomi had marked on her map. She stood at an intersection, holding it upside down. She'd realized this after 4 minutes of confusion when a voice appeared beside her. "That map is from 2019, the voice said. "Half those alley paths don't exist anymore." She turned. It was him. Up close, Dawn had the kind of face that looked like it had laughed a lot, not from ease, but from the deliberate choice to keep laughing despite everything. His jacket was clean but old. He looked at her map with the confident pity of someone who knew every corner of this neighborhood by heart. "The big market, right?" he said. "You've got the right street, wrong direction. Head south." "Oh." She turned the map around again, uselessly. "Have you eaten?" he asked. "I was going to buy—" "Come." He nodded toward his stall, 3 buildings back. "Sit for 5 minutes. You look like someone who's been surviving on convenience store triangle kimbap." She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it, because he was right. Exactly right. "Fine," she said. The tteokbokki was extraordinary. She didn't say this out loud. She had a feeling it would make him unbearable about it, but the sauce had something gochujang heavy and slightly sweet that suggested years of actual care. She ate the whole portion without speaking. He watched her with quiet satisfaction. "Good?" he asked. "Acceptable," she said. He laughed. "She says acceptable while scraping the bowl." "Okay, I'm Rudo," she said, because it felt wrong not to. "Dawn," he said. "You just moved into the rooftop above Madame Jiang's laundry, right?" She mentioned a new tenant. "Is this neighborhood that small?" "This neighborhood is exactly this small," he said. "Welcome. I'll walk you to the market before I head to the hospital." She looked up. Hospital? Something crossed his face, not pain exactly, but the practiced steadiness of someone carrying something heavy. "My grandmother," he said simply. "She's been in and out, just a check-in." He said it the way people say things they've said so many times, the words have worn smooth. Rudo recognized that texture. She'd had her own version, "I'm fine, just tired." It's part of the job words, polished by repetition into something that no longer quite told the truth. "I hope she feels better soon," Rudo said. And she meant it with her whole chest. Dawn looked at her. Not the way people usually looked at her. Not searching for something to take, not calculating, not performing back at her. Just looking. Like he was deciding if she was real. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Me too." A week passed. Then another. And in that time, something happened that Rudo had not planned for, had not included in any version of this experiment she'd designed in her head. She started to belong. Not because the neighborhood was glamorous, it wasn't. The rooftop got cold at night in a way that no amount of extra blankets solved. Her convenience store shifts ran from 9 p.m. to 3 a.m., and her feet ached in ways she hadn't known feet could ache. Her coworkers, Hyunjin, a university student saving for tuition, and Ajuma Park, who had run the shop for 20 years and had opinions about everything, treated her like exactly what she appeared to be, a young woman figuring things out. Hyunjin once said, "You're slow at the register, but you're nice to drunk customers, so I'll keep you." Ajuma Park once said, "You eat like someone who forgot that food is allowed to be enjoyed. Slow down, taste it." These were the most honest things anyone had said to Rudo in years. And then there was Don. He appeared with a reliability that felt less like coincidence and more like gravity. On the mornings she had no shift, he'd be at his stall when she passed. On the nights she finished at 3 a.m., he was often still there breaking down his equipment late or sitting on the step outside with a cup of convenience store coffee, apparently unbothered by the hour. "Don't you sleep?" she asked one night. Eventually, he said, "Sit down. You look exhausted." "I'm fine." "Your left foot is doing that thing." She frowned. "What thing?" "You shift your weight off it when it hurts. 3 weeks now. Sit down, Rudo." She sat down. He handed her half his coffee without asking. She drank it without asking what it was. And they sat in the 3 a.m. quiet and didn't feel the need to fill it with anything. These were the moments that scared her most. Not because something was wrong, but because nothing was. Because she could feel herself settling into this life like it was something she'd always been meant to find. And settling meant telling the truth. And the truth was the one thing that could make all of this disappear. It was Bomi who first said the word that Rudo had been refusing to think. "You're falling for him." The call came on a Sunday morning, and Rudo had stepped out onto the rooftop to take it, standing in the early sun with her journal under one arm and the wind doing something irritating to her wig. "I'm not," Rudo said. "You just described the way he handed you coffee like it was a poem." "I was giving context." "Rudo?" Bomi's voice softened. "I'm not judging you. I need to ask. When are you going to tell him?" The silence became its own answer. "That's what I thought," Bomi said gently. "The agency is getting suspicious. Director Choi hired someone the kind that finds things. You don't have unlimited time here." "I know. And the longer you wait to tell Don?" "I know, Bomi. The worse it's going to be when he finds out." "I know." She pressed her free hand against the rooftop railing, cold metal against her palm, grounding her. I need a little more time." He just got news that his grandmother's bill is larger than he expected, and he's trying to restructure his loan, and I cannot drop something like this on him right now. "Okay," Bomi said. Not convinced, but kind. "Okay, but Rudo, be careful. Real feelings are at stake here, his and yours." After the call ended, Rudo sat on the rooftop floor with her notebook and tried to write. Instead, she found herself drawing a small, bad sketch of a tteokbokki cart. She stared at it for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and, through a carefully constructed chain of anonymous transfers that Bomi helped arrange, sent enough to cover 6 months of Dawn's grandmother's hospital bills. She told herself it was just the right thing to do, that it had nothing to do with the way his voice dropped when he talked about his grandmother. The way worry lived in him so quietly, like a guest he'd stopped asking to leave. She told herself a lot of things that week. If you're still with this story and your heart is doing things good, this is AfroK-Tales by Solomon. And stories like this exist because love, in all its complicated forms, deserves to be told. Subscribe if you haven't. Share this with someone who needs it today. Drop a comment. Are you rooting for Rudo and Dawn? Or do you think the truth is going to break everything? Keep watching. We're not even close to the end. It was a Tuesday evening when the almost disaster happened. 3 teenage girls stopped at Dawn's stall, phones out. One was watching a performance clip Rudo's last awards show stage, the one where the choreography had broken the internet for 2 weeks. Rudo was sitting at the small folding table 3 feet away, eating tteokbokki. The girl looked at the screen, then looked up at Rudo. Her eyes went wide, and she grabbed her friend's arm. "Wait," the girl started. Aigu, don't even start, Da'an said, appearing from behind the cart with fresh stock, not even looking up. She gets that all the time. Everyone thinks she looks like that idol. She's just my friend Rudo. She works at the convenience store down the road. He said it without suspicion. Because for Dawn, it wasn't a cover story, it was simply the truth he knew. The girl looked between Dawn's unbothered confidence and Rudo's blank expression, and decided two people that calm couldn't possibly be hiding anything. Sorry, the girl said. You really do look like her, though. I know, Rudo said, and smiled in a way that gave nothing away. I get that a lot. The girls moved on. Da'an glanced at Rudo and said nothing about it, just went back to his cart. And Rudo sat there with her heart hammering so hard she was certain he could hear it. And she thought, I have to tell him. I have to tell him today. But the day folded into evening, and the evening into that familiar 3 a.m. walk home. And when Da'an fell into step beside her and said, completely without drama, I think I like you, Rudo. I don't know what to do with that, but I think it's true. The confession she'd been building all day simply collapsed. Because she looked at him in the dark, this man who had never asked her for a single thing, who had fed her tteokbokki and watched her foot without her noticing, who was now saying the most honest sentence she'd heard in years, and she could not respond to that honesty with a revelation that would rewrite everything he thought he knew. I think I like you too, she said. And that, at least, was completely and entirely true. 2 weeks before Director Choi's deadline, Da'an got the restaurant loan approved. He told Rudo outside her convenience store at the start of her shift, arriving slightly out of breath. His face was the kind of open that faces only get when something has gone right after a very long time of things going wrong. It went through, he said. The loan. A smaller one than I wanted, but enough to start. A real kitchen. An actual space. Not a cart. Rudo a place. She looked at him and felt something close in her throat. Da'an, that's... I know. He laughed real, full, unguarded. I know. I've been trying to make this happen for 3 years. 3 years. And it's finally... He stopped. Ran a hand through his hair. Sorry. I just needed to tell someone who would actually care. I care, she said immediately. He looked at her. Soft. Steady. I know you do. That night, Rudo sat in her rooftop apartment and wrote for 4 hours straight. Lyrics. Real ones. The kind that told the truth. She wrote about a cart and a broken scooter and a man who counted her footsteps without being asked. She wrote about cold coffee and the particular silence of 3 a.m. in a neighborhood where nobody knew her name. She wrote the whole song in one sitting, shaking slightly by the end. She thought, this is the most honest thing I've ever written. She thought he will never hear it. She was wrong about the second part. The photo appeared on a Tuesday morning, the kind of morning that starts ordinarily and then doesn't. Rudo was at the market when Bomi called, not texted. Called, which meant it was already too late for careful. It's out, Bomi said. A fan account posted a grainy photo last night. It wasn't clear enough for most people, but a tabloid picked it up and ran facial recognition. Rudo. It's confirmed. They know where you are. She went very still in the middle of the market. How long? It's trending. Right now. As we speak. She looked around the market slowly. Phones. People glancing at phones. A woman 2 stalls over looked up from her screen and looked at Rudo, and looked back at her screen and looked up again. Rudo walked. Not walked, quickly, deliberately, back toward the street. She needed to get to Da'an first. She needed him to hear it from her. She had perhaps 10 minutes, maybe less, before the neighborhood connected every dot. She turned the corner onto his street, at a near run, and stopped. Da'an was standing outside his stall, completely still, phone in hand, screen facing outward. On the screen, the tabloid article. The photo. The confirmed identity. Her real face next to the grainy neighborhood shot, side by side, unmistakable. He was looking at the phone. Then he looked up, and he looked at her. And Rudo understood what it meant to watch something real break in real time. Not dramatically, not shouting, not accusations. Just the quiet collapse of something that had been building for weeks. She could see it in the way his jaw set, his shoulders changed, his eyes moved over her face, searching for the version of her he'd known. "Dawn," she said. "I was going to tell you. I promise you, I was going to." "How long?" he said. His voice was completely level. That was somehow worse than anything else. "Since the beginning." He nodded once, very slowly. He put his phone in his pocket, looked at the stall, and walked away. Not fast, not dramatically, just steadily. Down the street, around the corner, gone. The SUVs arrived 7 minutes later. The next days moved like scenes from someone else's life. Director Choi's team swept her back into the machine press statements. Coordinated silence. A storyline about Rudo taking personal time for creative development that the media accepted because it was easier than the truth. Rudo sat through hours of crisis meetings and said almost nothing. She signed what needed signing. She nodded where nodding was required. Bomi watched from across the table and waited until the room cleared. "Say something," Bomi said. "I need to know if he's okay," Rudo said. "Rudo, I can't not as a story, not for any reason except that I need to know he's okay." Bomi pulled out her phone and quietly checked. His loan is still proceeding. His grandmother was discharged 2 days ago. She's home. He opened his stall this morning at the usual time. Rudo exhaled. "He's okay," Bomi said softly. "He's hurt, but he's okay." Rudo nodded. She looked at the glass wall of the conference room, the city beyond it, the unreachable ordinary distance of the streets below. "I wrote a song," she said. Bomi looked up. "While I was there, I wrote it about him. About all of it. I want to perform it." "Rudo, the comeback setlist is already approved. Director Choi will never—" "I'm not asking Director Choi." The night of the comeback stage, the stadium held 60,000 people. Rudo stood in the wings in full performance look lights, sequins, everything the machine required, and listened to the crowd and felt nothing. She was listening for something else. The quiet under the noise. The version of herself that had sat on a cold rooftop floor and written something true. She had not told Director Choi. She had told Bomi. Bomi had said, "I'll be right there when it goes wrong," which was, for Bomi, an extremely loving thing to say. She performed the first 2 songs perfectly. Every move, every note, every approved beat. The crowd responded with energy that, 3 months ago, she had lived for. Now it felt like something she was doing on behalf of a person she used to be. She stood at the center of the stage as the opening notes of her approved 3rd song began to play, and then she held up her hand, a signal to the band. The music stopped. 60,000 people went quiet with the speed of held breath. Rudo stepped closer to the mic. "I need to do something different tonight," she said. Her voice carried perfectly, calm and clear. "I need to sing something that isn't on the set list. Something I wrote for someone who doesn't know I wrote it. Someone who—" She paused. "Let it sit. Someone who turned off my song in the street because he was tired of hearing it everywhere." Scattered laughter from the crowd. "He called my tateokbaki terrible," she said. "I let him think that was the reason I kept coming back." The new music began. Her band had learned it in 2 days. It was not polished. It was not produced. It was the song exactly as she'd written it on the rooftop floor, arranged just enough to carry a crowd, but still raw enough to mean what it meant. She sang. She sang about a broken scooter and the 3 a.m. walk home, and the way someone can know you need to sit down before you've told them your foot hurts. She sang about tteokbokki eaten without anyone watching. She sang about the terror of being known, really known, and what had happened inside her when someone saw the person behind the performance without knowing there was a performance at all. She sang, and 60,000 people were completely silent. In Mapo-gu, Dawn's grandmother sat before a small rooftop television, newly home, wrapped in a warm blanket, watching the broadcast since the start. When Rudo stepped to the mic and said what she said, his grandmother called toward the kitchen without raising her voice. "Dawn, come and watch this." He came out drying his hands on a cloth, still carrying the closed-off quiet of the past week. He looked at the screen. He watched. He listened. The cloth in his hands went still. Because the song was specific in the way that only truth is specific, it didn't describe a type, or a feeling, or an impression. It described him, his grandmother's hospital, his cart, his terrible singing, the scooter, the coffee, the 3 a.m. street, the night he'd said nothing real can ruin something real, and meant every word. His grandmother looked over at him. "Well?" she said simply. Dawn set the cloth down. He stood there for another 10 seconds. Then he picked up his jacket. "Don't wait up," he said. His grandmother smiled at the television. Rudo walked off stage into the controlled chaos of the backstage world staff. Earpieces, Director Choi approaching with an expression that contained an entire conversation she did not have time for, and she picked up only her jacket from the hook in her dressing room, and she walked directly out of the building. She got into a taxi. The driver turned, recognized her, opened his mouth. "Please," she said, "Mapogu, as fast as you can." He drove. She sat in full stage costume and decided that reasonable had never once gotten her anything worth keeping. The taxi let her out on the edge of the neighborhood. She walked the rest. She knew the streets now, every shortcut, every alley, every place the pavement dipped after rain. She walked quickly, heels on old street stones, completely wrong for the occasion, completely right for who she was now. She found him on their street, the one they'd always walked home along after her night shifts. He was coming from the direction of his apartment building, jacket on, breath fogging slightly in the cold air. He stopped when he saw her. She stopped. They looked at each other across 15 feet of ordinary Seoul Street. She in full stage makeup and sequins that belonged to a different world. Him in his everyday jacket, with his hands in his pockets, and his face doing that thing, that careful, steadied thing that she now knew meant he was feeling something large and choosing how to carry it. "I know I should have told you," she said. "I've wanted to tell you so many times. That first night when you walked me to the market, the night with the scooter and the rain, the night you said nothing real can ruin something real. I almost told you then. I should have." Dawn looked at her for a long moment. "Did you actually like my tteokbokki?" he said. She blinked. "What?" "My tteokbokki. Did you actually like it? Or were you just being nice?" She stared at him. Then, despite everything, despite the stage makeup and the Seoul night and the 60,000 people she'd just left behind, she laughed. A real one. The same helpless laugh she'd laughed into her hand on the rooftop the very first night, watching him switch off her song. "It was the best thing I'd ever eaten," she said. "And I've eaten at restaurants that cost more than your monthly rent. So I need you to understand what that means." Something in his face shifted. The careful steadiness gave way to something warmer, something that had been waiting underneath it. "You paid my grandmother's hospital bills," he said. Not accusing, just knowing. She didn't deny it. Rudo. He said her name, her real name, the only name he'd ever known her by, and somehow that mattered. He'd called her that before he knew anything. He was calling her that now. "You could have told me who you were. I wouldn't have. You would have looked at me differently. I know you wouldn't have meant to, but you would have." He was quiet for a moment. Then, slowly, he nodded, because it was true, and they both knew it. "So what now?" he asked. She looked at him, at the jacket, the familiar face, the street, the city breathing quietly around them both. She thought about Director Choi and the contract and the 60,000 people in the stadium and the machine that would want her back by morning. "Now," she said, "I would really like it if you walked me home, like you used to, after my shift. You don't have a shift tonight. I know. Walk me home anyway." He looked at her for one more long, unhurried moment. Then he stepped forward, fell into step beside her, and they walked two people on an ordinary street, one of them slightly too glittery for the occasion, both of them exactly where they were supposed to be. They didn't say anything for half a block. Then Da-on said, "For what it's worth, the song was good. It was written for you. It should be good. The other ones you sing, I still don't like them that much. I know, but that one." He tilted his head slightly. That one sounded like a real person. Rudo looked at the street ahead of them, at the lights, at the city that had held this neighborhood like a secret. She felt something settle in her, not perfectly, not without the complications still coming, the conversations and contracts and impossible logistics. But underneath all of that, something was steady. Something was real. "Yeah," she said quietly. "It did. And if this story moved you, if Rudo and Dawn found a way into your chest and stayed there, then you already know what this channel is about. AfroK-Tales by Solomon exists for exactly this. For love stories that don't follow the rules. For hearts that find each other in the most improbable places. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Share this with someone who needs to believe real is still possible. Leave a comment, tell me what you felt when Dawn walked out of that apartment. Tell me if you cried. Tell me if you smiled. Because the next story is already waiting, and it begins where you least expect it.